I said what I had to say in his behalf, and he said what he had to say about the next 4 years when we were at our convention in Charlotte. But I do want to emphasize a couple of things, especially since I'm here in Orlando and in Florida. Florida is the future today. You have lots of young people with great diversity and enormous promise and too much poverty. You got a ton of old folks just like all of America is going to have as we baby boomers retire. And some are active and some need a little more help. Then you got all these folks in the middle trying to build an entrepreneurial future. And I want you to think about the main points I tried to make in terms of, let's just use Orlando as Exhibit A. All right, I believe what works in politics is an economic philosophy of shared prosperity, not one of trickle down. I believe what works in our real lives is a commitment to a society based on we're all in this together, not one based on you're on your own. And I believe what works to make progress is cooperation, not constant conflict. That's what I believe. Now, I know, as I said, in Charlotte, that the economy's not all the way back. But the American people have to believe me on this. I have traveled all over the world, not just when I was president, but since I left. My foundation sells AIDS medicine, the world's least expensive AIDS medicine, in 70 countries. We're setting up healthcare systems in 30 countries. We're helping farmers grow food and earn more money all over Africa and in Latin America. We're working on childhood obesity here and the problems of inner city entrepreneurs in America. I work everywhere. I'm telling you what works. What works is cooperation. What fails is constant conflict. You've got to vote for the cooperating. Grace just mentioned we were about to have the Clinton Global Initiative that we do at the opening of the UN every year. There'll be people there from all over the world. There'll be people from non-governmental organizations, from some of the poorest countries in the world that we fly in because they got good ideas too. There'll be Republicans and Democrats and independents, and we'll be having meetings, and when the meetings are over, you will not be able to tell the party identification. Why? Because we were worried about solving problems and seizing opportunities, not picking fights. And that is very different from the faction of the Republican Party that now controls their nominating process and their political operations. Teddy Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower. Richard Nixon's too liberal for these people. It's amazing. So I want to talk to you about what I think is at stake. But first, I want to say again something I said in Charlotte, because the whole election could come down to this. I honestly believe, doesn't matter who caused it or whether the contributing factors all happened under President Bush or something I did or something Ronald Reagan did 30 years ago. Regardless, President Obama didn't cause it, right? Wait a minute. But if he just kept telling us that and not done anything, we'd still have to replace him. Because we hired him to take the job, and you don't get to pick only the good and not the bad. So he took it on. Now, what I want to say again and again and again, it is my opinion, as someone who, beginning when I was a governor in 1979, has spent a lifetime trying to create jobs and help people start businesses and expand manufacturing and create opportunity for people and train and educate them to seize those opportunities. It is my opinion that no president, not Barack Obama, not Bill Clinton, not anybody who served before us, nobody who ever had this job could have repaired that much damage to this economy in just 4 years. That is my opinion. I believe that. So, therefore, what the president has done and what the choice is should determine who gets the vote. I think all the evidence is that shared prosperity is better economics than trickle down. All the evidence is that we're all in this together is a better guide to our society than you're on your own. All the evidence is that the tactics that promote creative cooperation work a whole lot better than constant conflict. And you don't have to go beyond Orlando to look at this. I mean, think about Orlando. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Orlando is the only city in America, as far as I know, that has 100 computer simulation companies headquartered here. Now, as far as they know, there's no recession. They're doing good. Why? Because you have this unusual cooperation. You have Disney World, the Universal theme park, right? They need computer simulation, don't they? It makes those rides and everything a lot more interesting. Then you got the video game division of Global Entertainment Arts. Any of you who, like me, have ever been addicted to those video games know that you cannot be kept in a state of constant attention deficit disorder and anxiety by a video game without really good computer simulation, right? But guess what? The military and the space program have also been putting billions of dollars a year into Orlando because they figured out a long time ago it is cheaper and way safer to teach people to drive tanks, fly jet airplanes, and take spaceships up into the atmosphere by simulators than the real deal. So they all work together. But wait a minute. But then you got to train people to work in these companies, and you got to keep learning new things all the time because the competition's out there. So there's the University of Central Florida, the largest unknown university in America. Right? And you've got, wait a minute, you have 53,000 students changing the curriculum every semester to meet the changing needs of these new jobs for the future. And more professors are being hired because they can do research in this area, and every time they make a new discovery, they can license it to one of these companies, and when they get paid, it goes back into the university to educate more kids and support more research. There's not a Republican and a Democrat way to do this. You either do this or you don't. But there is a cooperation versus a conflict way to do it. If all we did was spend our time trying to destroy the student loan program, trying to destroy the government's budget for education and for research and development, trying to make sure that we cut the heart out of the space program, you wouldn't have those computer simulation programs. You would have conflict instead of cooperation. You would have more people out of work instead of looking forward to a bright tomorrow. That's one of the reasons I'm for President Obama, because he believes in it. I'll give you another example. I just came from the convention center where I addressed 10,000 people, 5,000 people in one room, 5,000 in two overflow rooms, in a national conference on solar energy composed of, get this, one association of all the people who start these little companies and big companies to try to generate solar power. The other composed of people from the electric utility industry who believe in it and understand it's a big part of our future. There are now 100,000 Americans working in solar energy. That is more than are in coal in America. And these people are entrepreneurs, man. They're small business people. They want to get the show on the road. They hate bureaucracy. They hate regulation. They hate red tape. They're going to vote for President Obama because he is for building a clean, independent, secure, job-rich energy future for America. Because they know that this is something we got to do together. So when his opponent and the Republican platform said, we're going to get rid of all that, they ignored the fact that even today, we spend $22 of your tax money, either in tax credits or spending, to subsidize traditional energy and nuclear energy for every $1 we spend on renewable energy. But that $1 plus our great venture capitalists in America have put us at the head of the world in investing in the jobs of tomorrow, and they don't want to go back, and you shouldn't either. You clapped when I said the University of Central Florida, they want to repeal the student loan law, which goes fully into effect next year, which will lower the cost of student loans, save the government $60 billion, guarantee increases in Pell Grants for a decade, save the tax credits for middle-income families, and get this is the most important thing of all. Say to every young American who relies on student loans, you never have to drop out of college again because of the debt, because you can pay that debt now back for 20 years as a small, fixed percentage of your income. This will change the future for young Americans. Now, you want to bring America back? We have fallen to 16th in the world, 16th in the percentage of our young adults with four-year college degrees. But you got 53,000 waiting in the line right out here at the University of Central Florida, and a lot coming along behind them. Don't pull up the ladder, open the door to a college education, vote for President Obama's re-election. Now let's talk about health care. The president's opponent and all the people running against the candidates I just interviewed, they promise you they are going to repeal that health care law and take that awful burden off your back. They're going to repeal the Medicare savings, which they advertised last time and helped to beat a lot of Democrats. Right? They're going to repeal all that. Well, let me just remind you of something. Again, I know something about being competitive and creating jobs. We had a pretty good record, if you remember. But health care is an economic issue. One of our biggest problems is before President Obama's bill became law, we were spending 17.8% of national income on health care to insure 84% of our people. The next most expensive big country that was wealthy was spending 11.8% of income to insure 100% of their people. As a result, we still had more people getting sicker sooner, getting treated in the emergency room costing more, and less likely to get well than if they saw a doctor on time. And that's $1 trillion difference, the difference in 11.8% of our income and 17.8. $1 trillion that explains partly why, even before this meltdown, so many Americans never got a pay raise in the whole decade because their employers were good, honest people, and they wanted to give them a pay raise, but if they were also providing health care, they took all the profits they had allocated to labor and had to put it into those health insurance premiums. Don't you let typical people tell you we should go back to that. We shouldn't go back to that. We shouldn't go back to that. That is a big deal in Florida, so here's what's happened. since that awful law passed. That awful law requires 80 to 85% of your health insurance premium to go into your health care, not profits or promotion. As a result of which, Americans have already gotten $1.3 billion in refunds on their insurance premiums. And will save billions and more from companies that don't want to send refunds, so they just went in and applied to lower their rates. As a result of that law, listen to this, just in Florida, 224,000 young Floridians who were uninsured between the ages of 19 and 25 now have it for the first time because they can be carried on their parents' policy. As a result of that law, 960,000 children in Florida in families with pre-existing conditions now are insured when they weren't before or will be next year. And this is what you got to listen to, because we heard them, didn't we, attack our president and the congressional Democrats at their convention, saying it was terrible how the president and the Democrats cut Medicare. You remember that at the convention? Terrible. Terrible. And I said, you got to give it to Congressman Ryan. It takes real brass to attack somebody for doing something you did. Right? Okay, now wait a minute. So what happened? Here's what happened. Every year or so, a group of professionals in healthcare make recommendations to the government about what they should reimburse providers for, how much they should pay so they can take care of everybody that needs the Medicare service and give them a decent profit, okay? In both President Obama's budget and Mr. Ryan's budget, they took the advice, which lowered expenditures. It didn't cut Medicare. It lowered expenditures to providers over 10 years by $716 billion. Now, Governor Romney says that's terrible. He's going to give it back to the providers. Now, here's what you're going to have. Now, let me just tell you what the consequences are. Under the plan the president recommended that he signed in the health care bill, the average senior on the Medicare drug program saves $600 on the prescription drugs because we closed the donut hole, okay? More important, when you don't spend as much money, you add years to the life of the Medicare Trust Fund. 8 years were added. So instead of going broke in 2016, it's now safe till 2024. Gives the Congress a lot more time to work on it and figure out what to do. Money's there. The other thing, but Mr. Romney says, no, we're going to put it all back. And you got to really listen to this, Florida, because it's important to you. He says, we got to do that because they were so mean they cut the Medicare Advantage program. Now that is a bullet aimed right at Florida, because you have 1.2 million seniors in Medicare Advantage. Now here's the deal. When Medicare Advantage started, the idea was we'll pay private providers to give preventive and primary services not necessarily included in Medicare, and we'll pay them a little more to do it. In beginning, here's what the profit margin was. $1,100 payment for $600 worth of service. You'd do nearly anything for that, wouldn't you? Okay, so beginning when President Bush was still in office, they began to cut the profit margin. And the argument was, in fairness to the Bush administration, once we get people into the habit of staying healthier, their costs will go down. We'll still make money after you cut the margin. So all the Obama administration did was to cut the profit margin to about 14%, trailing down to 11%. That's still a pretty healthy profit margin. So they said, oh, this is disaster. Now I want you to know what happened since this bill signed. In Medicare Advantage, 1.2 million Floridians. In the Medicare Advantage program, They said, oh, nobody will want to offer it. Last year, after the bill passed, record number of insurance companies applied to offer Medicare Advantage. Last year, after the bill passed, 17% more people enrolled in Medicare Advantage. And last year, after the bill passed, the premium price for being there dropped 16%. So I just want you to remember that when you see all these ads, all these changes, and we got more companies, more people, and lower prices. So if the president was trying to wreck Medicare Advantage, he did a poor job of it, because it's in the best shape it's ever been in. So, last thing I want to say is, we do have to deal with the debt. And it is a problem, but you can't deal with it when there's no growth. To balance a budget, you need three things. You have to have controls on spending, adequate revenues, and economic growth. Why do you have to have economic growth? Because if there's no growth, interest rates go to zero, like they have been, so low, right? Then if you cut government spending, no matter how much you cut it, your tax revenues will drop more than you cut spending. When you add that to the increased cost of food stamps and unemployment and all the extra people you're going to put out of work. So what we should do is adopt the president's jobs plan now and adopt a 10-year deficit reduction plan that starts in a year when the government needs to get out of the debt business because the private economy is growing. Now, that's not what his opponent wants to do. He said, we got this terrible debt problem, so we need austerity now. So that's how come we lost 700,000 police officers and teachers and firefighters and nurses, because they wouldn't keep helping Florida and other state and local governments keep their folks in. But we're going to solve this debt problem. Now keep in mind, how could you do this at home? Imagine you're home at night, you're looking at all these bills. How am I going to pay these bills? My credit card balance, oh God, it's horrible. And just, their idea is, step one, we're going to solve this debt problem in steps. Step one, incur $5 trillion more debt, with another big round of tax cuts that benefit mostly upper income people. I was always taught it, when you're in a hole, the first rule is to quit digging. So, step one, $5 trillion more in debt. And well, they say, how are you going to pay for that? Well, we're going to pay for it by repealing all these tax exemptions, these loopholes. Well, then you say, well, which loopholes and how much are you going to get out of that? Their literal answer is, see me about that after the election. And when you look at them, you know why. If you take the debt, look, the deficit now, if we don't do anything, will go down as the economy grows. Because as the economy grows, we'll spend less on food stamps and unemployment and Medicaid, and we'll spend more, we'll get more revenues in. But it's there, and it's substantial. That won't go away. You can't solve it by making it $5 trillion bigger. And all the analysis shows, if you get rid of all the home mortgage deduction and all the charitable deduction, you still won't close the debt hole. You won't be closed. But the effect will be to give people with incomes over $3 million a $250,000 tax cut and raise tax cuts on middle income people $2,000. Now, they don't have to do that. They have other options. They can say, it isn't enough that we're already going to cut Medicaid by a third, which hurts Medicare people in nursing homes, and middle class, not just poor kids, middle class people whose children have disabilities, like autism or cerebral palsy or every other disability of anybody you know. Middle class people are able to keep body and soul together, take care of their kids, and hold on to their jobs because of Medicaid. So they can get rid of all that. And it won't be enough. So that's why they want to get rid of all the student loan supports and all this other stuff. That doesn't make any sense. Or they can do what they used to do, which is to say they were going to do it and get the tax cuts through and forget about cutting the spending and let the debt balloon. Now, here's why you ought to be worried about that. Because right now, it doesn't cost us much to pay for our debt because interest rates are low. If tomorrow morning you woke up and interest rates were what they were when I was president, the annual debt service payment would go from $250 billion to $650 billion a year. And that's $400 billion you'd have to take right out of the heart of the rest of the government. Everything it does. So the Democrats ought to be for a responsible debt plan. The president's giving you one. He says, I'll take it down $4 trillion over a decade. We'll have $2 of spending cuts for every $1 of new revenues. I ask people in upper income groups, because they have benefited from the last decade, because their incomes grew, because they got the tax cuts of the last decade, and because they're in a position to help us. And if we do these things together, our interest rate bill will drop and we'll cut this debt $4 trillion. I'm telling you, folks, it's the only thing you can do. So, I plead with you, get out there and talk to people for shared prosperity over trickle down, for we're all in this together over your own, for cooperation over conflict, and for arithmetic over illusion. Now, my last point. If you don't vote and everybody you know doesn't vote, this speech did not amount to a hill of beans. I don't care about all these polls. Only thing that counts is who shows up. And I'll tell you, when you see all these polls and they're different, they're all right. How can they all be right? They called people, they asked them questions, they faithfully reported it. What they differed on was who's going to show up. Every time you watch it from here on down, and if you see one poll says this, another one says that, in the Congress races, in the Senate races, in the presidential races, you just remember they're banking on who's going to show up. If you think the restriction of early voting is going to make it harder for people with disabilities to show up, that hurts the president because he's against cutting the Medicaid program and the help it gives to people with disabilities. If you think the restrictions on early voting will lead fewer young people, fewer elderly people, fewer first-generation immigrants who may be working 12 hours a day, and their likelihood to show up, that'll explain the difference in the polls. So here's what I have to say. You got 5 days to register to vote. And there are people here. Where are the volunteers who can register you? Raise your hand. We got a lot of people who can register you. When you go home, if you know somebody who's not registered, tell them to go online to gottaregister.com. G-O-T-T-A, gottaregister.com. You can early vote starting on the 22nd of September. We have come through every crisis this country has ever faced. Our death and destruction and decline has been predicted over and over and over again. So far, everybody who ever bet against America has been wrong. Why? Because we always grew. All these people talking about the intent of the founding fathers. When the Constitution was ratified, only guys like me could vote. White male property owners. That was it. But we could grow, and we have grown, and we will grow again. But you need to re-elect President Barack Obama to do it. Thank you, and God bless you.